Be right out. Can I help you?
Are you Hal O'Brien?
Yes. All right, let's just take it easy. You can have anything I've got. Listen, I don't keep much money in the shop. It's all checks and credit cards. There's a petty cash box in the desk. Right there. The cameras. Man, that's over 15 grand. Take it all. Just take it and go away. What do you want?
You are scum. Corrupter.
Finished? All right. Let me know when you get a closer fix on the time of death.
Sorry, can we go on?
I don't know what there is to go on about, Inspector. I've told you before. I know very little about my husband's recent work or where he spent his time.
Just for the record, where were you last night?
Just for the record, I was playing bridge at a neighbor's house between 8 and 11 last night. Now, I've never liked this place, and I certainly don't want to be here now.
All right. But we may have to talk to you again later.
If that's absolutely necessary.
Thank you.
Anything from the widow?
Yeah. An alibi and a cold wind. The lady couldn't care less.
There must be thousands of dollars worth of equipment here, and yet nothing was stolen, according to the cashier.
Which leaves us with a possible vengeance killing.
Or an execution. He was shot 3 times in the chest, close range.
You know, he was good. Could have stuck his camera someplace it didn't belong.
Organized crime.
Or blackmail.
Come on.
Hey, Cindy.
Hey.
You're looking great. Another modeling job?
Yeah.
All right.
No big deal. Some dumb insect spray for Dave's Discount Hardware.
Big.
Hey, listen. Gotta do me a favor. Could you turn these in for me? I've got to cut this afternoon or I'll never make it in time.
Okay, but that'll be a no-no with Miss Ardmore.
Hey, I'll graduate. Don't worry.
Do you know who she's going to celebrate with?
I haven't said yes yet.
Well, you haven't said no.
We'll see. Hey, listen. Thanks a lot, okay?
Yeah, sure.
Bye.
See you guys.
All right, Myers, let me know if you turn up anything. Well, that was Vice. O'Brien has no connection with the mob. No pornography, no bookmaking, no nothing. All the alibis check out. His wife and that cashier were out with friends, we know that. And he was killed between 10 and midnight. I hope you've got something.
Something we didn't expect. Take a look at this. The one on the right is the bullet that killed O'Brien last night. The one on the left was taken from the body of a Walter Reeves 8 days ago.
Same weapons.
38 Rupert and Jones. The lab just got a match, which means there's an obvious connection.
Obvious connection? I can't think of any. Let me look at his file again. So you better tell Tanner we'll take this case back.
Was Reeves the photographer?
No, but he was a guy with a fancy apartment and no visible means of support.
Meaning?
Meaning I don't know how he made a living, and his brother was pretty vague on the subject. Why don't you put out another warrant on that gun? Make it statewide and add O'Brien's name to it.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I'm going to have another talk with his brother.
Jerry, this is San Francisco, not Miami. When the wind blows off the bay, women want linings in their coats, not tissue paper. Now, what do you mean tomorrow? Today is the tomorrow you talked about yesterday. Shape up, will you, Jerry, huh? Yeah, okay. Lieutenant, I don't understand. I mean, it's not as though Walt lived on a desert island. He lived in a big apartment house. You mean to tell me nobody in that whole building saw anything or heard anything?
Mr. Reeves, that's right. Everybody in the adjacent buildings were out when your brother was killed. And we don't have anything without your help.
How can I help?
Well, did your brother know a photographer by the name of Hal O'Brien?
I have no idea.
You don't know any of his friends?
Very few. Walt was 7 years younger than me. We moved in different circles.
I see. You know, the last time we talked, you were kind of fuzzy about his means of support.
No, I wasn't fuzzy. I was ducking you.
You're not telling me anything I know.
Lieutenant, I didn't want my mother to know what the kid did for a living. You see, she's widowed. She's getting on. How do you think she'd feel if she saw a headline? Gambler murdered. I mean, it would break her heart.
Professional gambler, eh?
That's right. See, my father left us this business. Walt, he didn't want any part of it. He asked me to buy him out. I did.
Is it possible that your brother could have been involved with the mob?
I doubt it. What would he need them for? That kid was a winner.
Hollingsworth?
Yes.
Scum.
Beg your pardon?
Corrupting my flesh. Unpunished.
Okay, you ready, honey? Ready, Cindy? Now just relax. Just hold it. Get ready to start spraying and smiling, okay? All right, fine. Tell you what, let's bring in the wind from across the bay. Can I have some wind, please? All right, great. Now start spraying and... Okay, great, good. What's the matter? You having trouble? Don't worry about that hat. Don't worry about that. Don't worry about that. You look great. Okay, give me a little more. That's beautiful. Fantastic. Okay, nice and close. Hold this can a little bit closer to your face, baby. That's it. Oh, beautiful.
Well, another exciting day in the life of a licensed investigator, hiding out in motel parking lots.
So why do you do it?
Greed. No, I used to make a lot of money at this until they changed all those divorce laws. Now nobody cares who's sleeping with who. Just no need for backup evidence, irreconcilable differences. You boys are looking at an endangered species here.
Do you have anything for us?
Well, you know, every now and then you get a hold of a wife that just has to know, you know? Mrs. O'Brien was like that.
What about her?
Well, I'd been trailing her husband for weeks. She was absolutely convinced he wasn't spending all of his time shooting pictures of babies and flower arrangements.
And?
She was right. I nailed him 3 times with 3 different women. You're Mrs. O'Brien? She was filing for a divorce.
That's why she was so cold about her husband's death.
Yeah, and 3 women. Maybe we're dealing with a jealous husband.
I don't think so. They were all not married women. There were 2 divorcees and a widow here. Here you go. Here's something else. Mr. O'Brien's little black book.
How did you get this?
I didn't hear that question.
Okay, I didn't ask it. Women, women, more women. Speedy O'Brien. Hey, wait a minute. There's a few men here. And look who he's got listed. Walter Reeves.
All right, Mike, these three guys are all bookmakers. But they're just nickels and dimes stuff, nothing big at all.
Okay, so O'Brien gambled a little. What about Walter Reeves?
Well, we checked him out, and boy, he was a hot shot on the old poker table. But he's apparently clean.
No mob financing?
No. No, the guy was a loner. But he did make the circuit, you know, with Vegas and the cruise ships and Palm Springs. But as far as we could tell, the guy didn't need any help.
Okay, so we know O'Brien knew Reeves. They both gambled. Maybe somebody got taken over the coals. Robbins.
Sore loser. Well, maybe what?
It's for you.
Yeah.
Lieutenant Stone, this is Sheriff Groves in White Falls, California. Yeah, up near the Oregon border. Got a telephoto of your ballistics report on that .38. Looks to me like the same gun that killed one of our local businessmen.
Can I have that name, Sheriff? Mel Hollingsworth. I'd like to fly up in the morning and compare notes with you. Good, I'll see you then. Okay. That makes 3.
Another killing?
Yep, same gun. Whoever's handling it is having himself a field day.
Usual. The yard gets noisier every day. It's nice to get home.
Well, dinner will be ready soon. Why don't you watch the news for a few minutes?
Not until I get a kiss from my favorite girl.
Shot 3 times in the chest, fired at close range, huh?
Well, sure was a shock. Mel Hollingsworth ran that appliance store for almost 20 years. One of the nicest fellas you'd want to meet.
Did you ever spend much time with him?
Oh, yeah, sure did.
Did he gamble?
Well, if you want to call it gambling. He was a Monday night regular with me and some of the others in town. You know, no big thing, quarter limit.
Yeah, you'd be surprised how sometimes a quiet fella can be a closet plunger.
You mean for the big game?
That's right.
Not in this town.
I didn't mean this town.
No, Ernie. Jim asked me to, and I don't even know if I'm going to go to the prom. Well, why don't we talk about it at school, okay? I'm fixing breakfast for my dad. Okay, bye. Don't you want any breakfast?
Who was on the phone?
Just a kid from school.
At this hour? Can't he wait?
He's a little bit pushy.
Cindy, you ever think about what's happening out there? Decay. I don't mean what's happening to the neighborhoods. I mean moral decay. It's like a whirlpool. It's sucking us all under, corrupting everything, everybody. I've been thinking about that new job offer from Evans Shipyard in the North Bay area. We got to get out of the city.
I like the city.
We can buy a house, maybe in Mallory. That's only 5 miles from the yard. Now just imagine that. Clean air, lots of trees, nobody even locks their door at night.
Daddy.
I know that you've got to finish school, but we'll work that out.
It's not just my school. All my friends are here, and my career's finally getting started.
Oh, Ernie, whoever he is, and Jim Foster in his tight pants. You won't miss them, you know that. And that so-called career of yours, you've earned what, maybe $300 in 2 years? What kind of career is that?
Hey, well, it's just getting started.
Cindy, I'm serious. Think about it.
Look, I'm gonna be late for school. I'll see you later.
I've asked you not to wear these.
I like them.
I can't believe you said was. Any minute I expect the phone to ring and hear Mel's voice saying he'll be home soon. He closed the store every night at 6, be home by 6:30.
Well, did he ever leave town, go away on a business trip?
Once a year, to the appliance dealers convention. He was there last week, Thursday and Friday.
Well, you didn't tell me that.
Where was the convention held?
Does it really matter?
Was it San Francisco?
Yes. This year it was at the Larchmont Hotel.
Here you are, Inspector. Mr. Hollingsworth's bill.
Great. What do you know? Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
Can I come in?
No, Jim, I haven't got time.
Hey, what do I have to do to see you? Do I have to buy a camera and make an appointment?
Hey, thanks for the ride.
Cindy Lawson?
Yeah?
San Francisco Police.
Police?
Could we ask you a few questions?
Sure. I hope I haven't done anything major.
We hope not. We got your name from the Flash Answering Service.
They said you did some modeling.
That's right. Part-time. I don't graduate from high school till June.
What kind of modeling do you do?
Oh, mainly commercial stuff. Trade conventions, display ads. Yesterday it was for an insect spray.
Did you ever pose for a photographer named Hal O'Brien?
Mr. O'Brien. Yeah, I think it was for a supermarket ad.
What about Mel Hollingsworth?
Oh, sure. I modeled for him last week in his display booth at the appliance show.
At the Larchmont Hotel.
That's right. Why?
Do you work through a model agency?
Yeah, Fraser's. Could you tell me what this is all about?
Did you ever work for a Walter Reeves?
No, the name doesn't sound familiar. Why?
Well, all three of these men have been murdered.
Murdered?
And we thought since you worked for two of them, you might be able to help us.
Wow. I only worked for them. I don't know any of them.
Did they ever tell you anything about their personal lives?
No.
Did anything out of the ordinary occur while you were with them?
Hey, look, I'm really sorry about what happened. But I don't know anything about them.
Well, if anything comes to mind, please give us a call.
Yeah, but nothing's going to come to mind. They hardly spoke to me. Hey, listen, don't mention any of this to my father. He's a real worrier. You know how parents are.
Yes, I know.
You know, it could be a coincidence they're working for both O'Brien and Hollingsworth.
Well, let's dig anyway. You check the model agency and I'll check with the school.
Hi, Cindy Lawson. Any messages? Harry Dillman? Uh-huh. Okay. Wait a minute. Could you call him for me and tell him that I'll be there? Okay, thanks.
There's work assignments here for O'Brien and Mr. Hollingsworth, but I don't see anything from a Mr. Reeves.
Well, then she never worked for him.
Are you sure the file's complete?
Absolutely. The name means nothing to me either.
Okay. Thanks, Miss Frazier. Ms. Frazier.
Oh, Inspector, have you ever thought of moonlighting? As a model?
No, thank you. I was hoping you had something else in mind.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sort of married.
That's too bad.
Yeah, too bad.
Bye.
Bye.
This is the Webster Advertising Agency. I'm trying to reach Miss Cindy Lawson. This is her answering service, isn't it? Yeah, I know. I understand, but I have to reach her. I have a modeling job for her tomorrow. Oh, where? Harry Delman. Yeah, I've got it. Thank you.
Well, I can't imagine Cindy Lawson in any trouble.
Oh, no trouble. Just a routine investigation.
She's such a bright young thing. Has a B average. Could be higher, but she's cut a few times too often.
Yes, I noticed that in her file.
Well, it has to do with her modeling career. Children nowadays are so anxious to earn something extra. I suppose most families are feeling the tight money squeeze. You know, she does get credit for her modeling. It's called the work experience.
Have you ever had any disciplinary problems with her?
Oh, my, no. I tell you, Lieutenant, I wish there were more Cindys here at Peterson High. She's my idea of a really sweet young lady.
Hello, Harry. It's your happy call girl.
Sandy. Don't talk that way.
I'm sorry. We still friends?
That's better. Friends.
All of my clients are respectable and they value their privacy. Look, I already gave you this one, Cindy Larson's address. And I'm not supposed to do that.
Well, we can always get a court order if that's what
Lieutenant. Oh, look, I honestly don't know who she talked to. All I do around here is relay messages.
Aside from taking messages, do you ever make calls for your clients?
Yes, certainly, if they ask us to.
And charge it to their bills?
Yes,
May we see a copy of Cindy Lawson's bill?
I suppose so.
Where did you learn about that?
Little trick of the trade.
Since when did we have tricks?
I used to have a buddy that was an insurance salesman, spent a lot of time on the road and couldn't always get to a phone when a client was in.
Here you are.
Thank you. So, have you any idea whose number that is? 555-2300.
Yes, that's the Hastings Hotel.
Thank you very much.
Just a minute, Lieutenant. What about my bill?
Oh, I'll send it right back to you.
You look like a tomcat who found spilt milk.
I didn't find it, you did. Take a look at the third name from the top. Walter Reeves.
The model agency said they never heard of him.
She heard of him and she lied to us. Come on.
Good morning.
Morning. Hey, what did I do to deserve this?
Well, once in a while, I like to do for my favorite girl.
Mwah. Mwah.
Hey, come on, honey.
I love you. Okay, what's the real reason for breakfast in bed?
I'm sorry I lost my temper, but you were out so late I was worried.
Apology accepted. I would have explained to you last night, except you came on kind of strong. I was with Jim and Debbie. We were playing records and we just lost track of time.
Cindy, about that new job offer.
Dad,
You know-
I really don't want to talk about that right now.
It's really a good deal. And as far as you're finishing up school, I think I can manage a car for you.
Excuse me, Daddy, I'm gonna go brush my teeth.
Cindy? Put this on.
Rude.
Well, it's just not proper running around the house half naked.
Tell me, Daddy, did Mommy always have to dress up to the neck whenever you were around?
Cindy, about that job, you know, the pay's the same, but the setup's better. I'd have less traveling. I'd be able to spend more time at home.
Hey, Daddy, I just turned 18. I'm an adult. And I don't want to live in any dumb small town. If you want to take the job and move out, go right ahead.
You're going with me.
I guess you can make me move with you. But I'd move out. Back to San Francisco. And you won't be able to do anything about it. Now, the car, that's a pretty neat bribe. But I'm not interested. If you want us to live together, it's going to have to be here. Because I like my life here.
Hey, can you tell me where I can find Lawson? That guy in the truck? Okay. Thanks. Mr. Lawson?
Yeah.
Police?
Well, what can I do for you, Lieutenant?
Well, Mr. Lawson, we're looking for your daughter. Can you tell me where I can find her?
Cindy? Oh, she's at school.
No, she's not. And she's not at home either.
Oh, I suppose she got another modeling job. I asked her not to cut class, but you know how it is. What's the problem?
Did she tell you that I spoke to her yesterday?
No. Well, Cindy can't be in any trouble. She's a fine girl.
Yeah, her counselor at school shares your opinion. However, we're investigating 3 homicides. And as far as we know, your daughter's had contact with all 3 victims.
Are you sure you've got the right girl?
There it is, Cindy Lawson.
I don't understand. What possible connection?
She modeled for 2 of the victims.
You said there were 3.
That's right. The third one's name was Reeves, Walter Reeves. And your daughter denies knowing him.
She denied it. She doesn't know him.
Mr. Lawson, we know that she knew him.
Well, what do you want of me?
I'd like you to talk to her. Maybe she'll open up to you more than she did to us.
I'll do my best. I don't like to interfere in my daughter's life, especially the career part. You know, kids nowadays want more freedom than we had as youngsters.
Sometimes being a father can be very trying.
Ugh, do I know that?
Thank you.
Yeah. Ted, I'm going home. I think I'm coming down with a cold. Yeah, the work orders are all up to date. Right, thanks.
Excuse me. Have you ever seen this girl?
Sure, I've seen her. I know her. They get younger and younger all the time.
Come again?
A call girl?
That's what the bell captain at the Hastings said. I didn't believe it either, so I checked the Larchmont and a couple of other hotels. Confirmed they all know her.
Bring her in. Sit down, Cindy.
I guess he gave you the story about me. You shocked?
No, I've been a cop too long to be shocked. Surprised sometimes, but,
But you'd still like to know what a nice girl like me's doing in a racket like this.
it crossed my mind.
You know, there really is a generation gap. You don't understand that sex isn't such a big deal. One morning, I woke up, the guy was gone, there was $100 on my pillow. So easy. I guess I'm not here to talk about my sex life.
I think we are. You lied to us about Walter Reeves.
Okay. I met him through Mr. O'Brien. I didn't want to tell you about it because...
Because you were afraid we would figure you out?
Yeah. There was a big poker game at Mr. Reeves' apartment. I've never seen so much money in one place before. There were $1,000 bills on the table.
Go on.
There was a fight. There was a lot of screaming and yelling going on. This guy said that Mr. Reeves was cheating and that him and Mr. O'Brien were in on it together.
Who was he?
I don't know. Somebody said he was from Dallas. He was drinking, too. After a while, a couple of guys grabbed him and they threw him out. Mr. Reeves must have played with him before because he said he was always a sore loser.
And you were a shill for Mr. Reeves.
What's that?
You shocked me. And you call yourself a woman of the world.
Are you through with me?
No, we're not through with you. I want you to give me the exact description of that Texan and everybody else who was at that poker game.
Yes, information. Harry Delman Enterprises. Uh-huh. And, what's the address? Thank you.
Cindy, you know, one of these days you might get busted. Not by me, but sooner or later, one of the guys from the Vice Squad is bound to catch up with you. You ever seen the inside of a prison? You wouldn't like it. Not to mention the fact that you just might get yourself into something you can't get out of. Think about that, huh?
You know, you're a pretty nice guy. For a cop.
Delman, Harry Delman.
He's out, Lieutenant. Lieutenant? No, he's all right. Cover him up. Cover him up. Come on, hurry it up. Let's go. Make it fast. Who saw anything? You see anything?
One of the tenants said he saw a guy walking out, but he doesn't remember what he looked like.
You keep on it.
I will.
I'm taking that job. Pack your things.
You go without me.
Look, I'm not asking you anymore. I'm telling you. Throw those damn beads away.
Those were Mother's. Those beads were the only thing she left me.
Just pack. I'm taking you somewhere where I don't have to worry about protecting you anymore.
Like you protected Mother.
What are you talking about?
Hey, look, Daddy, no more lies, okay? You think I don't remember? She ran away with another man. You drove her out of the house.
That's not true. I loved her.
What'd you do? Did you listen to every phone call she made? Did you spy on her like you do me? Oh, God, how she must have hated you to run away with someone else. To run away from me.
That was so long ago, I thought you'd forgotten.
I knew you wanted me to. I tried. Because I love you. But I loved her too.
Cindy, you were too young to understand.
Would you leave me alone?
You were 7 then. At school the day I came home, and she was in the bedroom. With another man, and I was ready to forgive her even then. She was like you, vulnerable, easy to take advantage of. It was his fault. I would never have hurt her, ever. And I tried to tell her that. And she wouldn't listen. She just ran.
With him?
No.
What did he do? What happened to that man?
He was evil, a corrupter. Men like that have to be punished.
My God. You killed him? And you killed all those others too? Oh my God!
Cindy! Cindy!
Thank you very much. I'll just be a minute. Aren't you playing this up pretty big?
Of course. Still don't know how I could pass out like that. It's just a little shoulder wound.
Shock.
Must have been. Mike, this guy came at me from out of nowhere.
Did you get a good look at him?
No. He was still in the car. He looked like a big man with receding blonde hair.
Receding blonde hair. Big. Vic Lawson?
Cindy's father? Mike? He must have thought I was someone else. He called me Delman. Harry Delman. Mike, that name's on Cindy's list.
Cindy? What are you doing here?
Is anyone else here?
No, everybody's gone. Is it wise you're coming here?
I gotta talk to you.
Cindy, is something wrong?
Nothing.
Are you saying I could be next?
I don't know. It's possible.
Do you know who the killer is?
I don't know. That's why you gotta get out of town. Hey, look, don't answer it. He may be trying to find out if you're here. So he could come after you.
You said he. You do know who it is.
All right, you two stay here. I'll take the other unit with me, and be careful. He's dangerous.
You didn't call the police?
I can't.
What do you mean you can't?
Hey, look, don't ask me to explain it. I just can't.
Well, I can. How the hell do I ask for police protection because I've been seeing a teenage hooker?
Delman. Harry Delman.
No, please, no.
Why, drop it! Take it. Get that gun.
Daddy? Why?
Because you're my little girl.
Call an ambulance.
He looked awful, didn't he? How long do you think he'll be under observation?
Oh, that's up to the doctors. You do know that he might have to stand trial, and it doesn't look good.
You know, it's funny. I still love him. Even after everything he did.
Everything he did. Cindy, you've got to take some responsibility, too. Your father blamed them, and you were just as much at fault as they were.
Do you have any relatives in town? Anywhere where you can go and stay?
Yeah, I've got an aunt that lives across town. She asked me to come and live with her. I will. I want to graduate with my class.
Now, where you can keep up your modeling.
That's right. That too.
You know I shouldn't do this, but, do you mind if I offer you a little bit of fatherly advice? Cindy, I think you're a bright girl. I think you're very attractive. And I also think you have a great future as a model. If only you...
Yeah?
Now, you know what I'm trying to say. Why don't you give up that kind of life?
Why?
San Francisco in 1972 did not sleep so much as it twitched, a restless sprawl of hills and fog where the streets seemed to exhale secrets through sewer grates and cracked sidewalks, and Lieutenant Mike Stone had learned long ago that the city never confessed outright. It only muttered, leaving men like him to piece together the truth from half-heard phrases and bloodstains washed thin by the morning rain. And tonight the rain had come early, tapping insistently on the windshield of the unmarked sedan as Stone guided it through the Mission District with the practiced ease of someone who knew every incline by muscle memory rather than map. The radio low, jazz bleeding faintly into the hum of the engine, while beside him Inspector Steve Keller watched the streetlights smear into long amber streaks across the glass, his jaw set, his eyes restless in that way that betrayed a man still learning how much of the world he could afford to care about without it breaking him. The call had been routine enough on paper, a possible homicide in a walk-up apartment near Valencia, but nothing in San Francisco was ever truly routine, and Stone felt at the moment he read the address, a tightening in his chest that had nothing to do with superstition and everything to do with experience, because some corners of the city had a way of remembering violence, of drawing it back like a tide, and this was one of them. They parked beneath a flickering street lamp where the light buzzed like an insect trapped in glass, and Keller stepped out first, pulling his coat tighter against the cold as the smell of wet asphalt and old garbage rose up around them, a perfume the city wore without shame, while Stone lingered a moment longer, taking in the building's facade, the cracked stucco, the iron fire escape like a ribcage exposed. The windows dark except for one on the third floor, where a faint yellow glow pulsed. Alive in a way that suggested something had been interrupted rather than concluded. Inside, the stairwell was narrow and steep, each step worn smooth by decades of shoes and indecision, and the walls bore layers of paint in different shades of neglect, peeling back like history itself. And as they climbed, Keller asked the question he always asked in moments like this, not because he expected an answer, but because silence made him uneasy. You ever notice how these places feel like they're holding their breath? Stone gave a thin smile, the kind that acknowledged the thought without indulging it, and said, "That's just the city waiting to see if you're worth telling the truth to." On the third floor, a uniformed officer stood outside apartment 3C, his face pale, his eyes fixed on a point somewhere over Stone's shoulder, as if he could see through time if he stared hard enough. And when Stone showed his badge and slipped under the tape, the smell hit him immediately. Not the sharp metallic tang of fresh blood, but the heavier, sweeter odor of something already beginning to turn, mixed with cigarette smoke and cheap cologne. A combination that spoke volumes before a single word was said. The victim lay sprawled in the living room, a man in his late 30s by Stone's estimation, well dressed in a way that suggested recent money rather than old, his suit jacket discarded over a chair, his tie loosened, his eyes open and unseeing, staring at the ceiling as if searching for meaning in the cracks, and the cause of death was obvious enough. A single gunshot wound to the chest, clean, precise. The work of someone who knew where to aim and did not hesitate, and as Keller crouched to examine the body, Stone let his gaze wander, taking in the room with the methodical detachment that had become his armor over the years, the half-empty glass of whiskey on the coffee table, the ashtray overflowing with crushed cigarettes, the record player still spinning silently, the needle caught in an endless loop, repeating a fraction of a note over and over, a stutter frozen in time. There were no signs of a struggle, no overturned furniture, no broken glass, which meant the victim had either trusted his killer or never saw him coming. And both possibilities carried weight in a city where trust was often just another vice waiting to be exploited. Keller stood, brushing dust from his knees, his expression thoughtful rather than shaken, and said, he wasn't alone, pointing to a second glass near the sink, still wet, and Stone nodded, already filing the detail away, because it was always the small things that unraveled the larger lies, the unnoticed habits, the minor vices people convinced themselves didn't matter until they did. They identified the victim as Leonard Hale, a mid-level real estate developer with interests scattered across the city like poorly placed bets, a man with no criminal record to speak of, but plenty of rumors trailing him like exhaust. And as Stone listened to the uniform fill in the gaps, he felt that familiar pull, the sense that this case would not stay neatly contained, that it would seep outward, touching lives and institutions that preferred to remain unexamined, because San Francisco in those days was a city built on contradictions, progressive ideals rubbing shoulders with entrenched corruption, and men like Hale thrived in the spaces between, where oversight was lax and ambition could be dressed up as innovation. Back at the station, the fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in a sickly pallor that made even the most benign paperwork feel accusatory, and Keller leaned against a desk, flipping through Hale's file with the impatience of youth, while Stone poured himself a cup of coffee that tasted like it had been brewed sometime during the Nixon administration and left to stew ever since. And as they talked, the shape of the case began to emerge, not as a clear line but as a constellation of half-connections, a zoning dispute here, a counselled deal there, whispers of payoffs and favors exchanged in back rooms where the curtains were always drawn. You think this was business? Keller asked, and Stone considered the question carefully, because assumptions were dangerous things, and said, everything's business to someone, which was not an answer so much as a warning. Over the next few days, they followed leads that twisted through the city like the streets themselves, up into the quiet affluence of Pacific Heights where Hale had recently attempted to push through a controversial development, down into the Tenderloin where a bartender remembered him arguing with a woman who did not give her name, and into City Hall, where doors closed a little too quickly and smiles grew a little too thin when Stone flashed his badge. And through it all, the phrase kept circling back, something Hale had reportedly said more than once according to those who knew him well enough to gossip. No minor vices. A mantra he used to excuse his indulgences, his belief that small compromises were harmless so long as they did not cross some imaginary line. And Stone found himself dwelling on it late at night, turning the words over like a coin, because he had seen firsthand how it was never the grand sins that destroyed people, but the accumulation of little ones, the justifications that piled up until there was no solid ground left to stand on. The woman from the bar turned up eventually, not dead but frightened, her hands trembling as she lit a cigarette in the interview room. Her name Maria Alvarez, an activist of sorts, deeply involved in opposing Hale's latest project, and as she spoke, her anger flickered between righteous and personal, suggesting a relationship that had gone beyond ideology, and Keller leaned forward, empathy radiating from him in a way Stone recognized and quietly admired, because it took courage to care in this job, and Maria admitted that she had threatened Hale, had told him he would pay for what he was doing to her neighborhood, but she swore she had left him alive, that when she walked out of his apartment that night, he was pouring another drink, already distracted by his own sense of invincibility. It would have been easy to make her a suspect, to tie the narrative into a neat bow, but Stone knew better, because the city rarely offered such clean resolutions, and as he dug deeper, he uncovered financial records that pointed toward a shell company tied to a local contractor with known mob connections, a man who specialized in making problems disappear for a price. And suddenly Hale's death looked less like a crime of passion, and more like a correction, an adjustment made when negotiations failed. The pressure mounted from above as well, subtle at first, then more overt, a suggestion here, a warning there, that perhaps this was not a case the department needed to pursue with such enthusiasm, and Keller bristled at the implication, his youthful idealism clashing hard against the reality of institutional self-preservation, while Stone navigated the tension with the weary grace of someone who had fought these battles before and knew that survival often depended on choosing which hills to die on. One night, as fog rolled in thick enough to swallow entire blocks, Stone found himself alone in his office. The case files spread out before him like a map of the city's moral fault lines, and he thought about Hale, about Maria, about all the people who told themselves their actions were justified because the consequences were abstract or deferred, and he wondered, not for the first time, how many of his own compromises had been made in the name of pragmatism, how many lines he had redrawn, rather than crossed, and whether the difference mattered in the end. The break came unexpectedly, as it so often did, a call from an informant who owed Stone a favor and was tired of paying interest, a name whispered over the phone, a location, a promise that if Stone wanted answers, he should come alone, and as Stone hung up, he felt the familiar mix of anticipation and dread, because answers rarely came without a cost, and as he stepped out into the night, the city seemed to watch him go, its lights winking like knowing eyes, its streets stretching out ahead, full of secrets, full of minor vices that, taken together, had the power to ruin lives. Stone drove alone through the fog-heavy streets toward the waterfront, the city reduced to a series of floating lights and shifting silhouettes, his headlights cutting narrow tunnels through the grey, as if the darkness itself resisted being known. And he kept the radio off, preferring the low hum of the engine and the faint rattle of the dashboard, because this was the part of the job where noise distracted from instinct. And instinct was all he trusted when informants asked for solitude, because solitude meant vulnerability, and vulnerability was a currency easily spent and rarely refunded. The meeting point was a derelict pier near Dogpatch, a place half forgotten by development and wholly embraced by shadows, where rusted metal groaned with the movement of the bay and the smell of salt and oil mingled in the air. And as Stone stepped out of the car, coat collar turned up against the cold, he felt the familiar awareness settle over him. The sense of being watched not by a single pair of eyes, but by the city itself, by its countless windows and alleys and memories. The informant emerged from behind a stack of old crates, a man named Eddie Salazar, who had once run small-time hustles, before discovering that information paid better than theft, his face thin, his eyes darting, his hands never quite still, and he wasted no time on pleasantries, because men like Eddie knew that talk was dangerous and silence even more so. And he told Stone about a meeting that had taken place 2 nights before Leonard Hale was killed, a meeting between Hale and representatives of a contractor who went by the name Frank D'Angelo, a man whose public persona was all clean suits and charitable donations, but whose private dealings were whispered about in precinct hallways and union bars with equal parts fear and resignation. Eddie claimed he'd overheard enough to know that Hale had backed out of a deal, that he'd decided he could push through his development without paying the agreed price, confident that his political connections would shield him, and Stone listened without interrupting, because the truth often revealed itself in the pauses, in the moments when a liar forgot which version he was selling. But Eddie's story held together, its details messy in the way reality always was, and when Stone asked why Eddie was telling him this now, Eddie laughed, a short, humorless sound, and said, "Because I don't like men who think the rules don't apply to them, and because D'Angelo doesn't forgive debts." That was enough for Stone, or rather it was enough to move the case forward without closing it prematurely, and as he left Eddie behind and drove back toward the city proper, the fog began to thin, revealing the familiar contours of San Francisco's hills, their steepness a reminder that nothing here came easy or stayed level for long. At the station the next morning, Keller was already waiting, energy coiled tight, the impatience of someone who sensed momentum and wanted to seize it before it slipped away, and when Stone filled him in, Keller's eyes lit with a mix of vindication and anger, because D'Angelo was a name he recognized from his time studying organized crime, a man who operated in the grey spaces where legality was more suggestion than rule. And together they began the careful work of building a case that could withstand scrutiny not just from the courts, but from within their own department, where alliances were complicated and loyalties often divided. They started by tracing money, because money rarely lied even when people did, following shell corporations and offshore accounts that snaked through banks and law firms, each layer designed to obscure responsibility, and Keller marveled at the audacity of it all. The way corruption had been normalized into a system that functioned smoothly precisely because so many people depended on it. And Stone reminded him gently that outrage was useful only if it led somewhere productive, because anger, without direction, burned hot and fast and left nothing behind. Their investigation drew attention, as it always did when it brushed too close to powerful interests, and a deputy chief pulled Stone aside one afternoon, his tone casual but his message clear, suggesting that perhaps they were misinterpreting the evidence, that Hale's death might have been personal rather than professional, and Stone nodded, playing the role expected of him, while inwardly cataloguing the ways pressure manifested itself, because it was never a direct order, never something that could be written down, only a series of nudges and raised eyebrows that left room for plausible deniability. Keller, less practiced in these subtleties, fumed openly, and Stone took him out for a drink after work, not to commiserate, but to educate, choosing a quiet bar far from the neighborhoods most affected by the case, and as they sat nursing whiskies, Stone told Keller stories from earlier in his career, cases that had started with clear moral lines and ended in compromises he still wrestled with, and Keller listened, the idealism in his eyes dimming just enough to make room for something more durable, something closer to resolve. Meanwhile, Maria Alvarez resurfaced in unexpected ways, showing up at a city council meeting to publicly denounce Hale's project even in death, her words sharp, her grief transmuted into fury, and Stone watched from the back of the room, noting the reactions of those present, the subtle exchanges of glances, the men who stiffened at the mention of D'Angelo's name, and he began to suspect that Hale's refusal to pay had not merely offended the wrong people, but had threatened to expose a network of favors that extended far beyond a single development. When Stone and Keller finally brought D'Angelo in for questioning, it was done carefully, with warrants airtight and timing precise, because men like D'Angelo thrived on technicalities, and the interview itself was a study in contrasts. D'Angelo relaxed and courteous, answering questions with practiced ease, his denials wrapped in humor and feigned concern, while Keller pressed him hard, pushing for cracks in the facade, and Stone watched, intervening only when necessary, because he understood that D'Angelo's greatest weapon was patience, his belief that he could outlast any investigation by virtue of his connections. Nothing definitive emerged from the interview, no confession, no slip dramatic enough to end the case, but Stone noted the way D'Angelo's smile tightened when Hale's name was mentioned, the way his eyes flickered briefly toward the one-way mirror, and he filed those observations away, knowing they would matter later even if they meant nothing now. The breakthrough came from an unexpected direction, a young accountant working for one of Hale's shell companies who approached Keller late one evening, her voice shaking as she explained that she had found discrepancies in the books, payments routed through D'Angelo's contractor firm shortly before Hale's death, then abruptly halted, and fear radiated from her, the kind that came from realizing too late that she had wandered into dangerous territory, and Stone reassured her as best he could, because reassurance was part of the job, even when certainty was impossible. Protecting the accountant meant accelerating the case, pushing it forward before intimidation or worse could silence her, and the pressure intensified, calls from City Hall growing more insistent, warnings couched as advice, and Stone felt the weight of it settle on his shoulders, a familiar burden but no lighter for repetition, and he thought again of Hale's phrase, "No minor vices," and how it encapsulated the arrogance that made men believe they could dabble in corruption without consequence, that they could keep their sins compartmentalized, and he wondered whether Hale had realized, in his final moments, that there were no such things as minor vices, only choices that grew larger over time. As the case edged closer to a formal indictment, Stone found himself increasingly isolated, trusted colleagues avoiding him in the hallways, conversations ending abruptly when he entered a room, and Keller noticed too, his loyalty evident in the way he doubled down, working longer hours, digging deeper, refusing to be intimidated, and Stone felt a surge of protectiveness, because he had seen promising young inspectors chewed up by the system, their careers stalled or derailed for daring to push too hard, and he resolved to shield Keller where he could, even if it meant taking hits himself. One night, after another long day, Stone returned home to find his apartment door ajar. Nothing missing but the sense of safety he'd taken for granted. A message without words. And as he stood there in the dim light, the city humming outside, he knew the investigation had crossed an invisible line. That it was no longer just about Leonard Hale, but about the structures that allowed men like D'Angelo to operate with impunity. And he also knew that turning back now would mean accepting those structures as immutable, a compromise he was no longer sure he could make. The next morning, Stone and Keller prepared to move forward with arrest warrants, the evidence finally coalescing into something solid enough to act upon. And as they stood in the briefing room, maps and files spread out before them, Stone caught Keller's eye and saw not the reckless enthusiasm of youth, but a steadier determination, forged by confrontation with reality rather than ignorance of it. And in that moment, Stone felt a rare flicker of hope, because while the city was vast and its vices many, change did not always come from grand gestures. Sometimes it came from men willing to confront the accumulation of small wrongs and call them what they were, crimes. And as they headed out into the morning fog once more, sirens wailing softly in the distance, San Francisco seemed to lean in, watching, waiting, as if curious to see whether this time the truth would be allowed to surface. The morning the warrants were signed, San Francisco wore one of its deceptively gentle faces, sunlight breaking through the fog in hesitant shafts that lit the hills like a promise half-kept, and Stone watched it from the precinct window with the detached calm of a man who had learned not to trust appearances, because in his experience the city was most dangerous when it seemed benign, when violence and corruption moved quietly beneath a surface of civic order and progressive slogans. Keller stood nearby, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened, scanning the final paperwork with a concentration that bordered on ritual, as if precision itself might ward off the complications they both knew were coming. And when the clerk returned with the signed warrants, the paper felt heavier in Stone's hands than it should have, the weight of consequence disguised as bureaucratic formality. The plan was straightforward on its face, simultaneous pickups of Frank D'Angelo and two of his senior associates, designed to prevent coordination and minimize the chance of evidence disappearing in the gaps between arrest and interview. But Stone had learned long ago that straightforward plans rarely survived contact with reality intact, and as they briefed the team, he emphasized flexibility, the need to observe and adapt, because men like D'Angelo thrived on predictability, on knowing the rules well enough to bend them without breaking. They moved just after noon, when offices were busiest and anonymity could be found in crowds, Keller riding with Stone in the unmarked sedan, the city unfolding around them in familiar patterns, cable cars clanging in the distance, pedestrians weaving through traffic with the casual confidence of people who believed, however briefly, that the day belonged to them. D'Angelo's office occupied the top floor of a refurbished warehouse south of Market, all exposed brick and tasteful minimalism, a physical manifestation of the way old power rebranded itself without relinquishing control. And as they rode the elevator up, Keller's jaw tightened, the anticipation sharpening his features, while Stone focused on breathing evenly, grounding himself in habit, because emotion was a liability at moments like this. The arrest itself was anticlimactic, D'Angelo greeting them with a surprised smile that faded only slightly when Stone read him his rights, his associates protesting loudly but ineffectually as they were led away, and for a moment it seemed as though the operation might proceed without incident, the machinery of justice turning smoothly for once. But Stone felt the unease persist, a low hum beneath the surface, because he knew that D'Angelo's true defenses lay not in resistance but in influence. At the station, the interviews began, Keller taking the lead with one associate, while Stone sat across from D'Angelo in a room stripped of everything but a table, 2 chairs, and a mirror that reflected nothing honestly. And D'Angelo spoke freely at first, deflecting questions with charm and selective amnesia, presenting himself as a legitimate businessman unfairly targeted by overzealous law enforcement. And Stone let him talk, because he understood that men who believed in their own narratives often revealed more than they intended, especially when given enough rope to arrange their justifications neatly. The conversation circled Leonard Hale without landing, D'Angelo acknowledging their business relationship while denying any conflict serious enough to warrant violence, and Stone pressed gently, asking about the halted payments, the last-minute renegotiations, the tone of their final meeting, and it was there that a crack appeared, subtle but unmistakable, a flicker of irritation in D'Angelo's eyes, a tightening of his mouth as he spoke of Hale's arrogance, his refusal to understand how things worked, and Stone seized on it, Not aggressively, but persistently, because persistence eroded defenses more effectively than force. Meanwhile, Keller's interview yielded its own dividends. One associate buckling under pressure, offering partial truths wrapped in self-preservation, hinting at instructions given without names attached, expectations understood without being spoken, and when the pieces were brought together, they suggested a pattern of coercion that skirted direct culpability while creating an environment where violence became an acceptable corrective measure. Still, it was not enough, not yet, and Stone knew that the case would hinge on proving intent, on demonstrating that Hale's death was not an unfortunate byproduct of a volatile business climate, but a deliberate act sanctioned from above. And as the hours wore on, fatigue crept in, blurring the edges of certainty, and Stone caught himself thinking of his apartment door left ajar, of the message it conveyed, and wondered how many more such warnings would come before someone decided that intimidation was insufficient. The answer arrived sooner than expected, not in the form of another threat, but as a bureaucratic maneuver, a judge granting D'Angelo bail with conditions that felt laughably inadequate given the stakes. And as Stone watched D'Angelo walk free pending trial, his confidence restored, he felt a familiar surge of frustration tempered by resolve, because this was the moment where many cases faltered, where momentum dissipated under the weight of procedure, and he refused to let that happen. Instead, he turned his attention to Maria Alvarez, whose activism had grown more visible in the days since the arrest, her speeches drawing larger crowds, her rhetoric sharpening as she connected Hale's death to broader patterns of exploitation and neglect. And Stone worried about her safety, because public dissent had a way of provoking private retaliation, and when he suggested increased protection, Maria bristled, accusing him of paternalism, even as fear flickered beneath her defiance, and Stone recognized the paradox, the need to respect autonomy while acknowledging vulnerability, a balance he struggled with in his own life as much as his work. The accountant who had come forward fared worse, her car vandalized, anonymous calls interrupting her nights with heavy breathing and veiled threats, and Keller took it personally, his anger reigniting with renewed intensity. And Stone found himself once again in the role of mentor and anchor, reminding Keller that rage could cloud judgment just as surely as fear, that their best defense lay in meticulous preparation and an unassailable evidentiary chain. As the case moved toward a preliminary hearing, Stone's isolation deepened, superiors questioning his methods, colleagues offering support only in private, and he felt the subtle erosion of trust that accompanied any challenge to entrenched power. And late one night, alone in the office, he revisited the case files, searching for overlooked connections, for the thread that would tie D'Angelo unequivocally to the trigger pulled in Hale's apartment. It was then that he noticed a discrepancy in the timeline of one associate's alibi, a minor inconsistency that might have gone unnoticed under different circumstances, and he followed it patiently, cross-referencing phone records and traffic reports, reconstructing a narrow window in which orders could have been relayed and executed. And as the picture sharpened, Stone felt the satisfaction that came not from vindication, but from clarity, the sense that truth, however fragile, was asserting itself. Presenting the new findings to the district attorney was an exercise in persuasion as much as fact, and Stone spoke carefully, framing the evidence in a way that acknowledged its limits while emphasizing its implications, and the DA listened, weighing risk against principle, and in the end agreed to proceed, a decision that felt less like a victory than a commitment to see the process through regardless of outcome. The preliminary hearing was tense, the courtroom packed with observers and journalists eager to frame the narrative, and D'Angelo sat at the defense table, composed and inscrutable, while Stone took the stand, answering questions with the measured candor of someone aware that every word could be weaponized. And as he spoke, he felt the city's contradictions converge in that room, the ideals enshrined in law colliding with the realities of power and influence. When the judge ruled that there was sufficient cause to proceed to trial, a murmur rippled through the gallery, and Keller exhaled audibly, relief and apprehension mingling, because they both knew that the real battle lay ahead, that trials were marathons rather than sprints, and endurance mattered as much as evidence. Outside the courthouse, reporters pressed for comment, and Stone deflected with practiced neutrality, unwilling to reduce the case to soundbites, while Maria stood a short distance away, addressing her supporters with a fervor that bordered on recklessness, and Stone caught her eye, saw the exhaustion etched beneath her resolve, and wondered how long any of them could sustain this pace without fracturing. That night, as Stone walked the familiar streets back to his car, the city felt altered, not transformed but sharpened, its edges more pronounced, and he reflected on the phrase that had come to define the case, "no minor vices," and how it spoke to a worldview that minimized harm until it became unavoidable, and he resolved, quietly and without illusion, to see this through to whatever end awaited, because while he could not change the city's nature, he could, at least in this instance, refuse to let its smallest injustices pass unnoticed. And as he drove home through the hills, the fog rolling in once more, San Francisco seemed to settle around him, watchful and inscrutable, as if testing his resolve, daring him to continue. The weeks following the preliminary hearing unfolded with a deceptive slowness that Stone had come to recognize as the calm before a deeper kind of turbulence, the sort that crept into routine and made even the most familiar corners of the city feel provisional. And San Francisco responded in its own quiet way, fog drifting lower and lingering longer, as if the city itself were uncertain how much of its truth it was prepared to reveal. Keller threw himself into preparation with a discipline that bordered on obsession, cataloging transcripts, refining timelines, testing every assumption, as if it were a weak joint in a structure that might collapse under pressure. And Stone watched this transformation with a mix of pride and unease, because he recognized the pattern, the way commitment hardened into something less flexible, less forgiving. And he knew that while resolve was essential, rigidity could become its own liability. The defense moved swiftly, filing motions designed not so much to dismantle the prosecution's case as to exhaust it, challenging the admissibility of evidence, questioning procedural minutiae, and Stone found himself spending more time in windowless conference rooms than on the streets, a shift that left him restless, because he trusted the city more than the abstractions of legal strategy, trusted what people revealed unintentionally when confronted with reality rather than theory. Still, the street had not gone silent, and reports filtered in of pressure applied to witnesses, favors called in and repaid with interest, and when the accountant failed to show up for a scheduled meeting one afternoon, Stone felt a familiar knot tighten in his chest, the sensation of something slipping just out of reach. They found her hours later in her apartment, unharmed but shaken, her resolve fractured by a visit from men who had not threatened her outright, but had instead catalogued her vulnerabilities with unsettling precision, mentioning family members by name, referencing routines she had never thought to hide. And as Stone listened to her recount the encounter, he was struck not by the cruelty of the intimidation, but by its restraint, the way it relied on implication rather than action, because implication allowed for denial, for the maintenance of respectability, even as fear did the real work. Keller reacted with visible anger, pacing the room, jaw clenched, and Stone intervened, lowering his voice, grounding the conversation, because the accountant's fear was contagious, and they could not afford to let it dictate their response. And when she ultimately decided to continue cooperating, it felt less like a triumph than a reminder of the quiet bravery required of people who never expected to find themselves at the center of a criminal trial. As preparations continued, Maria Alvarez became both an asset and a concern, her public profile rising as she spoke out against the networks Hale had been part of, her speeches increasingly linking his death to a broader critique of power and accountability. And while Stone admired her courage, he worried about the narrative hardening around her, the risk that the defense would paint her as an agitator driven by ideology rather than truth, and he tried, gently and without authority, to suggest caution, only to be met with a weary smile and a reminder that silence had never protected anyone she knew. The trial date loomed, and with it came the inevitable compromises, the need to prioritize certain lines of argument over others, to accept that not every truth could be proven to a legal standard, and Stone felt the strain of these decisions acutely, because each omission felt like a small betrayal, a minor vice in service of a larger good, and he wondered, not for the first time, whether the distinction was as meaningful as he had once believed. Keller, sensing this unease, approached Stone late one evening, the precinct nearly empty, and asked him directly how he reconciled these contradictions, how he continued to believe in the work despite its limitations, and Stone considered the question carefully, because glib answers did more harm than honesty, and he told Keller that belief was the wrong word, that what sustained him was not faith in outcomes, but commitment to process, to showing up and doing the work as cleanly as possible, even when the results were compromised, because the alternative was disengagement, and disengagement was a luxury the city could not afford. The defense's strategy crystallized in the days leading up to trial, framing D'Angelo as a scapegoat for systemic failures, a convenient villain in a story that demanded one, and Stone recognized the appeal of this narrative, its ability to diffuse responsibility by broadening it, and he prepared accordingly, refining his testimony, anticipating cross-examination designed to cast doubt not on facts but on motives, to suggest that the investigation itself had been driven by personal animus or political ambition. The first day of trial arrived under a low, heavy sky, the courthouse steps slick with rain, and inside, the air was charged with a tension that felt almost physical, the gallery filled with observers whose interest ranged from genuine concern to idle curiosity. And as Stone took his seat, he caught sight of D'Angelo across the room, impeccably dressed, his expression neutral, and he felt again that sense of unreality, the disconnect between the gravity of the charges and the civility of the setting, because the legal system had a way of rendering even the most profound conflicts abstract. The prosecution's opening statement laid out the case methodically, emphasizing patterns of behavior, the convergence of motive, means, and opportunity, and as witnesses took the stand, the story unfolded incrementally, the accountant's testimony halting but precise, Maria's impassioned yet controlled, and Stone observed the jury closely, noting reactions, the moments when attention sharpened or drifted, because persuasion was as much about timing as content. When it came time for Stone to testify, he approached the stand with a practiced steadiness, aware that his credibility was both a strength and a target, and he answered questions clearly, resisting the urge to editorialize, because he knew that restraint conveyed confidence more effectively than conviction alone. The defense's cross-examination was relentless, probing every decision, every inference, suggesting alternative interpretations, casting the investigation as overreaching, and Stone felt the familiar frustration rise, the desire to push back, to insist on the reality he had seen and felt. But he held to the discipline he had cultivated over years, responding only to what was asked, trusting that consistency would speak louder than indignation. Outside the courtroom, the city continued its indifferent rhythms, buses running late, vendors hawking newspapers with headlines that simplified and sensationalized the proceedings, and Keller found himself grappling with the dissonance, the sense that something so consequential could coexist so seamlessly with normal life. And Stone reminded him that this was both the city's strength and its curse, its ability to absorb shock without stopping, to carry on even as injustices simmered beneath the surface. Midway through the trial, an unexpected development threatened to upend their progress, a key piece of evidence challenged on technical grounds, its admissibility hanging in the balance, and Stone felt the weight of the moment acutely, because this was the kind of inflection point where cases were won or lost not on substance, but on procedure, and as arguments were made behind closed doors, he reflected on the fragility of the enterprise, the way years of work could hinge on the interpretation of a single rule. When the judge ultimately ruled in their favor, allowing the evidence to stand, the relief was palpable but restrained, because they all knew that nothing was assured until a verdict was rendered, and even then, the outcome would be partial at best, incapable of addressing the broader issues the case had exposed. As the trial drew toward its conclusion, closing arguments distilled weeks of testimony into competing narratives, the prosecution emphasizing accountability, the defense invoking doubt and complexity, and Stone listened with a detached attentiveness, aware that once the jury retired, the story would no longer belong to them, that it would be reshaped by 12 individuals bringing their own experiences and biases to bear. The wait for the verdict stretched into hours, then days, each moment amplifying the strain, and Keller oscillated between confidence and anxiety, while Stone found himself strangely calm, not because he was certain of the outcome, but because he had reached a point of acceptance, understanding that he had done what he could within the constraints imposed upon him. When the jury finally returned, the courtroom hushed, anticipation tightening like a held breath, and as the verdict was read, finding D'Angelo guilty on some counts and acquitting him on others, the reaction was muted, a mixture of relief and disappointment that defied simple categorization, and Stone felt a complex wash of emotion, satisfaction tempered by the knowledge of what remained unresolved. Outside, reporters swarmed, seeking clarity where none existed, and Maria stood among her supporters, her expression unreadable, and Stone realized that the case's true impact would unfold over time, in policy debates, in quieter shifts of perception, rather than in the immediate aftermath of a verdict. That evening, as Stone and Keller walked the familiar streets once more, the city seemed unchanged and yet subtly altered, its lights reflecting off wet pavement, its fog rolling in as reliably as ever, and Stone thought again of the phrase that had haunted the investigation. No minor vices, and how it encapsulated a worldview that underestimated the cumulative power of small choices, and he felt a renewed, if cautious, resolve, because while the case had not delivered a clean victory, it had affirmed something essential, that persistence mattered, that attention to detail could disrupt even well-entrenched systems, and as they parted ways for the night, the city humming around them, Stone knew that this was not an ending but a continuation, another chapter in an ongoing negotiation between ideals and reality, one he was prepared to engage with for as long as the streets demanded it. In the weeks after the verdict, San Francisco settled back into itself with the deceptive ease of a city accustomed to absorbing disruption without ever fully acknowledging it, the headlines fading, the crowds dispersing, and Stone felt the familiar post-case dislocation, the sense that something significant had ended without truly concluding, leaving behind a residue that clung to thought and routine alike. Because partial justice had a way of lingering longer than failure ever did. Keller tried to treat the outcome as a victory, or at least as validation, throwing himself into new assignments with a forced enthusiasm that fooled no one who knew him well, and Stone watched this with a quiet understanding, because he recognized the impulse to outrun ambiguity, to keep moving so as not to dwell on what remained unresolved. The department, for its part, moved on quickly, promotions discussed in hushed tones, internal memos reframing the case as an example of institutional effectiveness, and Stone found himself both included and excluded in subtle ways, his name invoked when convenient, his presence avoided when uncomfortable questions arose, and he accepted this with the weary pragmatism of someone who had long since stopped expecting gratitude from systems designed to perpetuate themselves. It was during this lull, when vigilance naturally waned, that the next fracture appeared, not directly connected to Leonard Hale or Frank D'Angelo, but echoing the same patterns with unsettling familiarity. A body found in a construction site near the Embarcadero, officially ruled an accident, but whispered about in ways that triggered Stone's instincts. Because he had learned to listen not just to what people said, but to how they said it, the pauses, the reluctance, the way eyes slid away when certain details surfaced. The victim, a city inspector named Paul Cerny, had been involved peripherally in Hale's development approvals, his signature appearing on documents that had been scrutinized during the trial, and Stone felt the old tension stir, the awareness that systems rarely dismantled themselves all at once, that when pressure was applied in one place, it often surfaced elsewhere in subtler, more deniable forms. Keller, initially resistant to reopening what felt like a closed chapter, gradually came around as they examined the inconsistencies, the lack of safety protocols at the site, the anonymous tip that suggested Cerny had planned to speak to someone in internal affairs shortly before his death, and Stone saw in Keller's shifting posture the maturation he had both hoped for and feared, the acceptance that their work was less about resolution than about vigilance, about staying present in a landscape that rewarded complacency. As they dug deeper, they encountered resistance that felt different from before, less overt but more pervasive, a sense that lines had been redrawn quietly in response to the earlier case, that people were more cautious now, more careful to avoid leaving trails that could be followed, and Stone understood this as both progress and setback, because awareness did not eliminate corruption, it merely refined it. Their investigation into Cerny's death unfolded slowly, hampered by missing records and uncooperative witnesses, and Stone found himself returning again and again to the phrase that had framed the previous case. No minor vices, because it seemed to encapsulate not just individual rationalizations, but institutional ones, the idea that small procedural shortcuts, minor ethical lapses, could be tolerated so long as they served efficiency or stability, and he wondered how many such justifications had paved the way to the point they now occupied. Maria Alvarez re-entered their orbit unexpectedly, not as a witness but as a catalyst, her activism evolving in response to the trial's outcome, her focus shifting from individual accountability to systemic reform, and while Stone remained wary of entangling law enforcement with political movements, he could not deny the resonance of her message, the way it articulated frustrations he encountered daily but rarely voiced, and he found himself attending one of her community meetings, not officially, but as an observer, listening as residents spoke about zoning decisions, safety violations, and the quiet pressure exerted on those who questioned them. The meeting left him unsettled, because it confirmed what he already suspected, that the issues they confronted were not anomalies but patterns, sustained by a collective willingness to look the other way when the cost of attention felt too high, and he shared this unease with Keller over coffee the next morning, framing it not as despair, but as context, a reminder of why their work mattered, even when victories were incomplete. As the Cerny investigation progressed, they uncovered evidence of falsified reports and coerced sign-offs, a network of minor infractions that, taken individually, might have been dismissed as oversight or error, but together painted a picture of systematic negligence bordering on intent, and Stone felt a familiar anger rise, tempered by the knowledge that pursuing this line would invite scrutiny not just of individuals, but of the department's own practices, because law enforcement was not immune to the temptations it sought to police. This realization forced Stone into a period of introspection, examining his own career, the times he had accepted expedient explanations, the moments he had chosen not to push further because the personal or professional cost seemed too great, and he wondered whether those decisions had contributed, however indirectly, to the environment they now faced. And this questioning did not lead to self-flagellation, so much as to a renewed commitment to transparency, even when it proved uncomfortable. Keller, sensing this shift, struggled initially, his loyalty to the institution clashing with his growing recognition of its flaws, and Stone guided him through this tension not with lectures, but with example, demonstrating how to question without undermining, how to hold systems accountable without abandoning them entirely, a balance that required constant recalibration. The turning point in the Cerny case came when a junior clerk in the planning department agreed to speak off the record, describing a culture where pushing back was subtly discouraged, where those who raised concerns found themselves reassigned or marginalized, and while the clerk stopped short of alleging direct threats, the pattern was unmistakable, and Stone recognized it as the bureaucratic equivalent of the intimidation tactics used by more overtly criminal organizations, effective precisely because it left no fingerprints. Bringing this information forward required careful navigation, collaboration with internal affairs and the district attorney's office, and Stone felt the old pressures resurface, the warnings couched as advice, the reminders of career trajectories and institutional loyalty, and he faced them with a steadiness born not of defiance but of clarity, because he had reached a point where ambiguity no longer felt like a refuge. The investigation's expansion had personal consequences as well, straining Stone's already limited private life, nights spent poring over documents rather than sleeping, relationships neglected in favor of work that offered no guarantee of resolution, and he acknowledged this cost without romanticizing it, aware that sacrifice did not confer virtue, it merely reflected priorities. Keller, too, felt the strain, his optimism tempered by fatigue, and Stone encouraged him to take time when possible, to cultivate a life outside the precinct, because burnout served no one, and he recognized in this advice a lesson he himself had learned too late. As evidence accumulated, the narrative coalesced around a systemic failure rather than a singular crime, and Stone prepared himself for the backlash that would inevitably follow, because institutions resisted narratives that implicated them broadly, preferring to isolate blame where it could be contained. And he worked closely with the DA to frame the case in a way that emphasized accountability without collapsing into generalization, a delicate balance that required precision and restraint. The day the findings were presented to the Oversight Committee, Stone felt a familiar mix of apprehension and resolve, the room filled with officials whose expressions ranged from defensive to genuinely concerned, and as he spoke, laying out the evidence, he avoided rhetoric, relying instead on facts and documented patterns, trusting that the weight of accumulation would speak louder than any single allegation. The response was predictably mixed, commitments to review procedures paired with assurances that no wrongdoing would be tolerated, language Stone had heard before and learned to treat cautiously. But he also sensed a subtle shift, an acknowledgement that the previous case had made it harder to dismiss concerns outright, that attention, once drawn, altered the landscape even if it did not transform it overnight. In the aftermath, Stone and Keller returned to their routines, the city unfolding around them as it always had, its beauty and brutality intertwined, and Stone reflected on the evolving nature of their work, how it had moved from chasing perpetrators to interrogating systems, from addressing symptoms to questioning causes, and he recognized that this trajectory offered no clear endpoint, only a commitment to ongoing engagement. One evening, as Stone walked alone along the waterfront, the lights reflecting off the bay in fractured patterns, he thought again of Hale, of D'Angelo, of Cerny, and of the countless others whose stories intersected briefly with his before receding into the city's vast narrative, and he understood that the phrase "no minor vices" was not merely a justification but a warning, a reminder that the smallest compromises accumulated over time, shaping outcomes in ways that could not be easily reversed, and as he turned back toward the city, the fog rolling in once more, he felt neither triumph nor despair, but a steady determination, because while he could not eradicate the city's flaws, he could continue to illuminate them, one case at a time, trusting that attention itself was a form of resistance, and that in a place as complex and contradictory as San Francisco, that resistance mattered. San Francisco had learned how to look innocent by morning, the fog ironing the city flat, the hills smoothed into silhouettes like a child's drawing erased and redrawn until the lines grew soft, and by the time Lieutenant Mike Stone reached the Hall of Justice, he carried that softness with him like a lie he hadn't decided to tell yet, because the night before had left a residue that coffee could not scrub away. The memory of a woman screaming on Pacific Heights not from fear, but from fury, the echo of a glass door shattering somewhere near North Beach, the way a suspect's pulse jumped when Heller mentioned a name no one should have known, and all of it threaded back to the same unlovely truth that had been stalking their cases for weeks, that the city's respectable vices were the most dangerous because they wore ties and smiled for cameras, and Stone, whose patience had always been a practiced thing rather than a natural gift, found himself bristling at the thought of how many men had learned to make a living by selling the idea that nothing they did really mattered, that a little corruption was just the cost of doing business, that there were no minor vices because vice itself could be measured and excused, weighed and balanced against civic pride. Inspector Steve Heller arrived late, hatless and unapologetic, his youth a contradiction he carried like a badge and a bruise, his eyes already scanning the room for angles, for stories that could be pulled loose and made to confess, and when Stone tossed him the file, thin for a homicide, thick for a conspiracy, Heller smiled the way a man does when he recognizes the shape of a puzzle he's solved before, but refuses to admit it, because admitting it would mean accepting the ending too soon, and they fell into step the way they always did, not because of habit, but because the city demanded pairs, demanded that its contradictions be walked side by side. The seasoned calm and the restless hunger, the weight of experience and the impatience of youth, and together they went back out into streets that had begun to warm, to sweat out last night's sins, to show them again the places where money changed hands quietly, and the places where blood made a louder argument. The case of the week, though Stone hated thinking of it that way, as if time could be parceled, centered on a mid-level fixer named Arnold Pruitt, found face down in a florist's delivery van with a single neat wound that suggested a professional hand, and Pruitt's ledger, discovered not where it should have been, but where someone wanted it to be found, had led them through a labyrinth of zoning variances, campaign donations, and charitable galas that had all the charm of a social calendar, and none of the innocence. And as they followed the trail it became clear that Pruitt's sin was not greed but curiosity, the dangerous habit of asking why a favor cost what it did, and who benefited when the bill came due, and Heller, whose curiosity had always gotten him into trouble and occasionally out of it, felt a kinship that made him reckless, pushing interviews too hard, leaning into rooms where he was not invited, while Stone played the long game, letting silence stretch until it broke on its own, and the city responded to both of them with its usual mix of openness and evasion. The shopkeeper who talked too much because he believed in the police the way others believed in saints, the attorney who talked just enough to feel cooperative and no more, the councilman who smiled for photographs and offered condolences that sounded like rehearsals, and through it all ran the whisper of a private club on Nob Hill, where deals were sealed with handshakes, and the rules were unwritten but absolute, where the drinks were strong and the walls were soundproofed with money. And when Stone and Heller finally gained entry under the pretense of following a different lead entirely, they felt the temperature change, the air cool and expensive, the sense that time itself moved differently there, that consequences were delayed by design. And in that room they saw the city's anatomy laid bare, the bones of power polished and presented as decor, and Stone understood something then that he had suspected for years, but never articulated. That San Francisco did not suffer from corruption so much as it curated it, selecting which vices were acceptable and which were to be punished, and the distinction had nothing to do with morality and everything to do with visibility. The night brought with it a confrontation that did not look like one until it was too late, a quiet conversation in a side street that turned sharp when a gun appeared where a cigarette had been, and Heller, quick as he was, still felt the cold bloom of fear as he realized how close curiosity could come to costing him everything, and Stone, stepping in with the authority that comes from having survived worse, de-escalated not with bravado but with an offer that sounded like mercy and was in fact a calculation. And when the suspect fled it was not because he was afraid of the law, but because he had seen a future he did not want. A future in which his own minor vices would be itemized and judged without the benefit of a committee. They spent the rest of the night piecing together a narrative that would hold in court and in public, trimming the truth not to hide it, but to keep it from being strangled by the people who would claim ownership of it. And Stone wrestled with the ethics of that trimming, knowing that every cut risked leaving a scar that would itch later, while Heller argued that survival was a kind of truth too, that sometimes you had to live long enough to tell the whole story. And their argument, like so many before it, ended not with agreement, but with an understanding that the city did not care about their philosophy as much as it cared about results. Dawn found them at the waterfront, the fog lifting just enough to reveal the lines of ships waiting to be loaded, unloaded, moved on, and Stone thought of Pruitt again, of a man who had tried to read the ledger behind the ledger and had paid for it with his life, and he felt a familiar anger settle into something like resolve. A promise he made not to the dead, but to the living, to keep asking the questions that made powerful people uncomfortable, even if the answers came wrapped in compromise. And Heller, watching the city wake, felt older than he had the day before and not entirely sorry about it, because age, he was learning, was not just the accumulation of years, but the accumulation of lines you refused to cross, and those you had crossed anyway. And as they walked back toward their car, the city seemed to lean in, to listen, as if it knew that this was not the end of the story, but a turn in it, another chapter in a book written in alleys and offices and clubs with no windows, a book whose title could only be understood by those who read between the lines, that understood the cruel joke at its heart, that there were no minor vices, only small ones that grew when left alone, and that San Francisco, beautiful and ruthless, would keep offering them up as long as there were men like Stone and Heller willing to walk its streets and insist, again and again, that the cost of looking the other way was always higher than anyone admitted. The case did not close so much as it receded, like a tide pulling its debris back into the bay, and San Francisco, having briefly exposed its underbelly, resumed the careful choreography of appearances, which left Lieutenant Mike Stone with the uncomfortable sensation that the city was watching him now, measuring his persistence the way a card-sharp measures an opponent's patience. Because in the days after Pruitt's death the leads dried up too cleanly. Witnesses forgot details with suspicious efficiency, and documents that had existed on Tuesday were suddenly misfiled by Thursday, and Stone, who had learned long ago that resistance often announces itself as cooperation, grew quieter, more deliberate, letting his reputation for restraint do the work of a provocation, while Inspector Steve Heller chafed under the lull, his instinct always to move forward, to chase motion rather than absence, and their partnership entered one of those phases where silence spoke louder than disagreement, where each man trusted the other to play his part without explanation, because the city, in its infinite variety, respected nothing so much as a coordinated response. The new thread appeared innocuously, as such things always do, in the form of a routine burglary on the Mission District's edge, a pawnshop hit with no violence and little payoff except for a small metal box that the owner insisted was worthless, and it would have stayed routine if not for the way the responding officer described the thief's urgency. Not greed but panic, as if the act itself were less important than what it allowed him to avoid, and Heller, reading the report, felt the familiar prickle of recognition, the sense that fear was the only currency more reliable than money, and when Stone authorized a follow-up that raised eyebrows for its intensity, the city answered back with a whisper rather than a shout. A name passed along in a bar, where the jukebox drowned out confessions, a safe house, near Potrero Hill where men went to forget themselves, and a private courier service that specialized in discretion and charged accordingly. What emerged, piece by fragile piece, was the outline of an informal insurance network that protected the city's power brokers not with policies, but with secrets, each stored like a chip that could be cashed in when loyalty faltered, and the stolen metal box, far from worthless, contained microfilm that had not been updated in years, but was priceless in its specificity, a catalogue of sins that had been archived and forgotten until someone realized forgetting was a luxury no longer affordable, and Stone felt the old anger sharpen into focus, because this was not corruption as excess, but corruption as infrastructure, a system designed not merely to profit but to endure. And the deeper they dug, the clearer it became that Pruitt's curiosity had brushed up against this archive, that his death had been not a punishment, but a correction, an adjustment, meant to preserve the illusion of stability. Heller pushed for speed, arguing that the longer they waited the more time the network had to adapt, to burn files and move assets, and make scapegoats of men who would never know why they had been chosen. while Stone countered with the patience of someone who understood how easily a rush could become a trap, and their debate, conducted in low voices over bad coffee, reflected not a disagreement of goals but of scars, each man carrying memories that shaped his tolerance for risk, and the city, indifferent to their philosophy, presented them with a deadline of its own when a courier turned up dead in the Presidio, his body arranged with a care that suggested a message rather than an impulse, the absence of his satchel louder than any note, and suddenly the quiet week snapped into focus, revealing itself as a preparation. The investigation that followed unfolded across neighborhoods like a map of class and consequence, from the manicured calm of Sea Cliff to the cluttered urgency of Chinatown's back rooms, and everywhere Stone and Heller went they encountered the same polite resistance, the same assurances that nothing was amiss, and beneath it the same flicker of fear that told them they were close enough to make people reconsider the value of silence. And it was in a cramped office overlooking Market Street that they finally met the woman who would change the tempo of the case, a records clerk named Eleanor Fisk, whose job had been to make things disappear and whose conscience, long dormant, had been stirred not by morality but by exhaustion, the simple weariness of maintaining lies for men who would never remember her name. And Fisk spoke in fragments at first, testing them, offering details that could be dismissed as gossip until Stone responded with a patience that made space for truth, and Heller with a bluntness that made deception pointless. And what she gave them was not a confession, but a map, a way of understanding how information flowed through the city like water through pipes, invisible until it burst. And she warned them too, in a voice stripped of drama, that the archive had guardians, men who believed sincerely that they were protecting San Francisco from itself, that chaos would follow if too many truths were released at once. And Stone recognized the argument because he had heard versions of it his entire career, always from those who benefited most from the delay. The night Fisk decided to cooperate, Heller walked her to her car against procedure and instinct alike, feeling the weight of responsibility settle into his chest. Because youth does not make you careless so much as it makes you optimistic, and optimism, he was learning, was expensive, and when a shadow moved where it shouldn't have, he reacted without thinking, pulling her back just as a shot cracked the air and ricocheted into the night, the sound scattering pigeons and promises alike. And in the chaos that followed, Stone arrived not with anger, but with clarity, issuing orders that cut through panic, because survival, like truth, often depended on structure. Fisk lived, shaken but resolute, and the attempt on her life did more to confirm her value than any document could have, forcing the department to acknowledge that this was no longer a matter of isolated crimes, but of organized self-preservation. And the pressure mounted from above in the form of cautionary memos and concerned inquiries, each couched in language that suggested support while implying restraint. And Stone felt the familiar squeeze of politics closing around the work, the reminder that the law did not operate in a vacuum, but in a city that had opinions about how loudly justice should speak. Heller, restless as ever, channeled his energy into the details, tracing courier routes and cross-referencing names until patterns emerged that suggested an impending move, a consolidation of secrets in anticipation of exposure, and the revelation came too late to stop the transfer, but just in time to witness it. A nocturnal ballet of vans and briefcases converging on a decommissioned warehouse south of the Bay Bridge, and as Stone and Heller watched from a distance, they understood that this was not a heist but a migration, the archive shifting locations like an animal sensing a storm. And Stone made a decision, then, that would define the rest of the case, choosing not to intervene immediately, but to follow, to let the network reveal its endpoints, a choice that required trust not just in his partner, but in the idea that the city could withstand the truth when it came. And as the warehouse emptied and the night swallowed its tracks, San Francisco held its breath, unaware that something fundamental had just moved beneath its streets, something that would not be so easily buried again. And Stone, looking out over the dark water, felt the weight of years settle into a single thought, that the city's greatest talent was adaptation, and that this time, if he and Heller were careful and stubborn enough, they might force it to adapt to something it had always tried to avoid: accountability. By the time the sun rose again over San Francisco, it did so with the indifference of something that had seen all of this before: the quiet migrations of power, the rearranging of secrets, the belief that if one moved carefully enough nothing truly changed. And Lieutenant Mike Stone felt that indifference settle into his bones as he stood at the edge of the city watching traffic thicken, knowing that somewhere beneath the ordinary rhythm of commuters and delivery, trucks, and invisible war was accelerating, because the relocation of the archive was not an ending but a signal, a declaration that the men who curated the city's sins had decided the time for patience was over, and Stone understood better than anyone that impatience, when paired with money and fear, produced mistakes, which was both their greatest danger and their only real opportunity. Inspector Steve Heller, running on too little sleep and too much caffeine, attacked the new information with the fervor of someone who sensed the shape of a breakthrough, even if he couldn't yet touch it, mapping out the warehouse routes, cross-checking vehicle registrations, building a lattice of possibilities that grew denser by the hour, and in the process he began to see something that unsettled him. A convergence not around a single location but around a person, a name that surfaced repeatedly in peripheral contexts, never central enough to attract attention, but always present when the city's quiet arrangements were being made. A man named Victor Halprin, a civic consultant whose public reputation was so clean it bordered on antiseptic, whose photograph appeared in newspapers smiling beside mayors and philanthropists, and whose private life, as far as official records were concerned, barely existed, and Heller felt the familiar thrill of recognition, tempered by the dread of what such a discovery implied. Because men like Halprin did not operate alone, they operated as nodes, and removing a node without understanding the network only ensured it would rebuild itself elsewhere. Stone, reviewing the same name with a practiced calm, felt a deeper unease, because Halprin represented the evolution of corruption he had watched over decades, the shift from crude exchanges to abstract influence, from envelopes to favors, from crimes you could point at to systems you had to explain. And explaining, Stone knew, was harder than arresting, especially in a city that preferred elegance to confrontation. Their first attempt to approach Halprin was met with a politeness so impeccable it verged on parody. A secretary who apologized for everything without acknowledging anything. An office designed to suggest transparency while revealing nothing. And Halprin himself, when they finally met him at a charity luncheon under the pretense of unrelated business, radiated a confidence that came not from arrogance but from calculation, the assurance of a man who believed he understood the limits of the law, and had positioned himself just beyond them. And as Stone and Heller exchanged pleasantries that tasted like cardboard, each measuring the other, the city hummed around them in a blur of donors and speeches and clinking glasses, and Stone felt the anger rise again, not hot but cold, because this was what power looked like when it learned how to behave. The luncheon yielded nothing tangible, but confirmed their suspicion that Halprin knew exactly who they were and why they were there, and that knowledge accelerated events in ways neither man fully anticipated, because within 24 hours Eleanor Fisk vanished, not taken violently but erased with bureaucratic precision, her apartment cleared, her name removed from internal schedules, her existence reduced to an absence that screamed louder than any body ever could, and Heller reacted with a fury that surprised even him, slamming his hand against his desk, railing at procedures and promises that suddenly felt like lies, while Stone absorbed the blow with a silence that frightened his partner more than anger would have, because Stone knew what this meant, that the network had chosen escalation, that they were no longer content to intimidate, but willing to consume. The search for Fisk unfolded like a lesson in controlled panic, leads pursued and dismissed, safe houses checked too late, and all the while the pressure from above intensified, not in the form of explicit orders, but in subtle suggestions that priorities be reassessed, resources reallocated, a language of management that masked fear with reasonableness, and Stone recognized the strategy for what it was, an attempt to outlast them, to let exhaustion and isolation do what bullets had failed to accomplish. And he responded in the only way he knew how, by narrowing the focus, stripping the case down to essentials, trusting fewer people, making fewer calls, and in doing so he crossed an invisible line from sanctioned investigation to personal crusade. A transition that did not change his methods so much as his tolerance for consequences. Heller, pulled along by Stone's gravity, found himself questioning assumptions he had carried since joining the force, discovering that the badge did not grant immunity so much as visibility, that protection was conditional and often temporary, and this realization, far from breaking him, sharpened him, making his instincts more precise, his impatience more selective, and it was this sharpened instinct that led him to a parking structure beneath a downtown office complex where a courier van appeared at irregular intervals, never staying long enough to draw notice, and when they followed it one night without backup, violating every sensible rule they knew, they found themselves at the edge of the city again, near an abandoned ferry terminal where the fog gathered thick and sound behaved strangely, and there, in the echoing cavern of concrete and water, they stumbled upon a transaction that felt less like a handoff and more like a confession, men speaking in low, urgent tones about redundancies and liabilities, about Fisk not as a person, but as a variable that had not been properly contained, and Stone listened, heart pounding with a clarity he hadn't felt in years, because this was the sound of the network talking to itself, unguarded and afraid. And when the moment came to intervene, he did so with a decisiveness that surprised even him, stepping out of the fog with his badge raised, and his voice steady, forcing the scene into the open where lies struggled to breathe. The arrests that followed were messy and incomplete, suspects scattering, evidence lost to the water, but what they gained was something more valuable than a clean case, a fragment of the archive itself, damaged but legible, a series of names and dates that pointed unmistakably toward Halprin, and beyond him to men whose power had insulated them from scrutiny for years. And as they stood there amid the chaos, Heller felt a grim satisfaction tempered by fear, because he understood now that this fragment was both a weapon and a curse, that possessing it made them targets not just for criminals, but for institutions that preferred ignorance to accountability. The fallout was immediate and brutal. Stone summoned to closed-door meetings where concern masqueraded as reprimand. His judgment questioned not because it was flawed, but because it was inconvenient, and he listened with the patience of a man who had already decided how far he was willing to go, offering just enough contrition to keep the door open while refusing to surrender the evidence. And Heller watched this performance with a mixture of admiration and dread, realizing that mentorship sometimes meant being shown not how to succeed, but how to endure. The city responded as cities do when cornered, with narratives. A carefully constructed story leaked to the press that framed the arrests as a crackdown on a rogue courier ring, minimizing the implications, isolating the damage, and for a moment it seemed as if the network might survive intact, shedding a layer and moving on. But Stone, reading between the lines, saw the cracks forming, the subtle shifts in alliances, the way men like Halprin began to distance themselves from events they could no longer fully control, and he sensed that the endgame was approaching, not as a dramatic climax, but as a narrowing of options, a point at which someone would have to decide which truths were worth sacrificing others to protect. The part of the case that haunted Heller most was Fisk's absence, the uncertainty of her fate gnawing at him in quiet moments, because uncertainty, he was learning, was its own form of violence, and when a lead finally emerged weeks later from a source who asked for nothing but anonymity, pointing toward a private clinic outside the city that specialized in relocations, Heller felt a flicker of hope so sharp it hurt, and Stone, wary but unwilling to dismiss it, authorized a discreet approach, understanding that if Fisk was alive she represented not just a witness, but a moral fulcrum, proof that the city's machinery could be resisted. The drive out of the city that night felt longer than it should have, the lights thinning, the air changing, and as they neared the clinic, Stone reflected on the strange symmetry of it all, how a city built on reinvention had perfected the art of disappearance, and he wondered whether this time, finally, reinvention might work in the opposite direction, turning exposure into something lasting. They did not find Fisk at the clinic, not exactly, but they found evidence of her passage, medical records altered but not erased, a trail that suggested she had been moved again, kept alive for reasons that were no longer purely defensive, and this discovery, while frustrating, confirmed something crucial, that the network was no longer merely protecting itself, but bargaining, and Stone knew what that meant, that someone somewhere was deciding how much truth the city could afford. And as they drove back towards San Francisco with the fragment of the archive secured and the weight of unfinished business pressing down, both men understood that the next phase would not be fought in alleys or warehouses, but in offices and courtrooms, in conversations where words were weapons and silence was currency, and that the streets they had walked for so long were about to bear witness not just to crime but to choice, because the city, for all its beauty and ruthlessness, was finally being asked to look at itself without the comforting filter of minor vices, and Stone, gripping the steering wheel as the skyline reappeared, felt a resolve settle into something unbreakable, the knowledge that whatever happened next, whatever price was demanded, he was done pretending that survival alone was enough.